Obligations of parties to contracts. The parties to a contract must either perform, or offer to perform, their respective promises unless such performance is dispensed with or excused under the provisions of the Contract Act or of any other law. Promises bind the representatives of the promiser in case of death of such promiser before performance, unless a contrary intention appears from the contract. A contract being an agreement enforceable by law, creates a legal obligation, which subsists until discharged. Performance of the promise or promises remaining to be performed is the principal and most usual mode of discharge. Performance. Actual performance. Where a party to a contract has done what he had undertaken to do, or either of the parties have fulfilled their obligations under the contract within the time and in the manner prescribed. Offer to perform. Offer to perform or attempted performance or tender of performance. It may happen sometimes, when the performance becomes due, the promiser offers to perform his obligation but the promisee refuses to accept the performance. Person by whom promise is to be performed. If it appears from the nature of the case that it was the intention of the parties to any contract that any promise contained in it should be performed by the promiser himself, such promise must be performed by the promiser. In other cases, the promiser or his representatives may employ a competent person to perform it. By whom a contract may be performed. Promiser himself. It means contracts which involve the exercise of personal skill or diligence, or which are founded on personal confidence between the parties, must be performed by the promiser himself. Agent. Where personal consideration is not the foundation of a contract, the promiser or his representative may employ a competent person to perform it. Legal representative. A contract which involves the use of personal skill or is founded on personal consideration comes to an end on the death of the promiser. As regards any other contract, the legal representatives of the deceased promiser are bound to perform it unless a contrary intention appears from the contract. Third persons. When a promisee accepts performance of the promise from a third person, he cannot afterwards enforce it against the promiser. Joint promisers. When two or more persons have made a joint promise, then, unless a contrary intention appears by the contract, all such persons must jointly fulfill the promise. If any of them dies, his legal representatives must, jointly with the surviving promisers, fulfill the promise. Effect of refusal. Succession. When the benefits of a contract are succeeded to by process of law, then both burden and benefits attaching to the contract may sometimes devolve on the legal heir. In other words, the liability of the son will be limited to the extent of the property inherited by him. Assignment. In the matter of assignment, however, the benefit of a contract can only be assigned but not the liabilities thereunder. This is because when liability is assigned, a third party gets involved therein. Thus a debtor cannot relieve himself of his liability to creditor by assigning to someone else his obligation to repay the debt. Effect of refusal to accept offer of performance. Where a promisor has made an offer of performance to the promisee, and the offer has not been accepted, then the promisor is not responsible for non-performance, nor does he thereby lose his rights under the contract. Conditions of every such offer. Every such offer must be unconditional, it must be made at a proper time and place, and if the offer is an offer to deliver anything to the promisee, then the promisee must have a reasonable opportunity. Effect of a refusal of party to perform promise. When a party to a contract has refused to perform, or disabled himself from performing his promise in its entirety, the promisee may put an end to the contract, unless he has signified, by words or conduct, his acquiescence in its continuance. Liability of joint promisor and promisee. Devolution of joint liabilities. When two or more persons have made a joint promise, then, unless a contrary intention appears by the contract, all such persons, during their joint lives and after the death of any of them, his representative jointly with the survivor or survivors and after the death of last survivor, the representatives of all jointly, must fulfill the promise. Any one of joint promisors may be compelled to perform. When two or more persons make a joint promise, the promisee may, in the absence of express agreement to the contrary, compel any one or more of such joint promisors to perform the whole of the promise. Sharing of loss by default in contribution. If any one of two or more joint promisors makes default in such contribution, the remaining joint promisors must bear the loss arising from such default in equal shares. Effect of release of one joint promisor. Where two or more persons have made a joint promise, a release of one of such joint promisors by the promisee does not discharge the other joint promisor or joint promisors, neither does it free the joint promisors so released from responsibility to the other joint promisor or promisors. Rights of joint promisors. When a person has made a promise to two or more persons jointly, then, unless a contrary intention appears from the contract, the right to claim performance rests, as between him and them, with them during their joint lives, and after the death of any of them, with the representative of such deceased person jointly with the survivor or survivors, and after the death of the last survivor, with the representatives of all jointly. Time and place for performance of the promise. Where no application is to be made and no time is specified. Where, by the contract, a promisor is to perform his promise without application by the promisee, and no time for performance is specified, the engagement must be performed within a reasonable time. Application for performance on certain day to be at proper time and place. When a promise is to be performed on a certain day, and the promisor has not undertaken to perform it without application by the promisee, it is the duty of the promisee to apply for performance at a proper place and within the usual hours of business. Performance in manner or at time prescribed or sanctioned by promisee. The performance of any promise may be made in any such manner, or at any time which the promisee prescribes or sanctions. Time and place for performance of the promise. Where time is specified and no application to be made. When a promise is to be performed on a certain day, and the promisor has undertaken to perform it without application by the promise, the promisor may perform it at any time during the usual hours of business, on such day and the place at which the promise ought to be performed. Where no application to be made and no place fixed for performance. When a promise is to be performed without application by the promisee, and no place is fixed for the performance of it, it is the duty of the promisor to apply to the promisee to appoint a reasonable place for the performance of the promise, and to perform it at such a place.